There is a message carved into the desert of Peru so large you can only read it from the sky. For over 50 years they told you it was written for aliens. It wasn't. It's not a star map. It's not a landing strip. It's not a hoax. It's a prayer. And the people who carved it signed it with the severed heads of their own neighbors. I know how that sounds. Like a line built to keep you watching. So let me show you the receipts instead. Here's what I'm going to put in front of you. What they actually drew out there and how. Why the most famous ancient aliens theory on Earth is wrong and who started it. Whose heads ended up in a museum drawer in Chicago. And the strontium test that revealed who they really were. What every single one of those lines is pointing at. And the last thing the desert did to them, which I'll save for the end, because it's the part that's actually about you. I'm not going to tell you spacemen landed here. I've got something stranger than that, and it's all cataloged. You decide what it means, because the last line they ever cut into that desert isn't a drawing at all. Let's clear the runway first, since that's where this always starts. In 1968, a Swiss writer named Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods. He looked at the long straight lines on the Nazca Plain, and he said they were an airfield, a landing strip for alien ships, copied by primitive locals who didn't understand what they'd seen. That one idea sold tens of millions of copies. And it's why you know the Nazca Lines at all. And it's wrong, not even close to right. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. The real story is stranger than the runway. Because the real story is cataloged, dated, and you can check every piece of it tonight. None of this is fringe. The Nazca Lines are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They've been studied since 1941. The truth about them is sitting in academic journals right now. It just never reaches you because the runway is louder. So hold one object in your head for the next 20 minutes. Not a line, a head, a human head mummified by the driest desert on Earth. A hole punched through the forehead so it could hang from a cord. It's real, and it sits in a drawer in the Field Museum in Chicago. By the end, I want you to know whose it was. Start with the ground. The Nazca Plain is one of the driest places on the planet. Some years it doesn't rain at all. And that's the only reason any of this survived, because nothing out there ever gets washed away. The surface of that desert is covered in dark stones, rusted almost black by thousands of years of sun. Underneath, the ground is pale. So to draw, you don't carve and you don't dig. You just lift the dark stones off and set them aside, and the pale earth shows through like a line on a chalkboard. That's the whole trick. A child could do it. The hard part was never the how. A mathematician named Maria Reiche spent 40 years out there, alone, with a broom and a notebook, mapping every figure. She proved these people laid out enormous shapes with real geometry and a few wooden stakes. No mystery in the method. The mystery is the why. Why pour generations of labor into pictures that, from the ground, you can't even see? Because there are hundreds of them. Most are just lines and geometric shapes, dead straight, running for miles. But scattered among them are the famous ones, the animals. A hummingbird, a monkey with a curled tail, a spider, a creature people call the astronaut. Each one drawn in a single unbroken line, as if your pen never left the page. For a long time, the leading explanation of the sky. In 1941, an American named Paul Kosok stood on the plain at sunset on the winter solstice and watched the sun drop right at the end of one of the lines. He called Nazca the largest astronomy book in the world. Maria Reiche believed it too. A giant calendar written in the dirt. It's a beautiful idea, and it failed the test. In the late 60s, an astronomer named Gerald Hawkins, the man who'd argued Stonehenge was an observatory, fed 186 of the Nazca Lines into a computer and checked them against the sky. 39 of them pointed at something, the sun or the moon on some important day. 39 out of 186, about 1 in 5, which is exactly what you'd expect if you drew the lines completely at random. The calendar wasn't there, so if it's not the stars and it's not a runway, what is it? The answer was under their feet the whole time. It's water. The man who made the case is an archaeologist named Johan Reinhard. And in 1985, he pointed out something everyone had walked past. Most of the lines don't aim at anything in the sky. They run to water. They start near springs. They trace the dry rivers. And they point at the mountains, the place the rain clouds gather and the meltwater comes down from. In a desert that's dying of thirst, the lines are a map of the one thing that matters. And look again at the animals with that in mind. The hummingbird, in the cultures of the Andes, is a symbol of fertility. The monkey comes from the Amazon, the green world over the mountains where water is everything. The spider was tied to rain. These aren't a zoo. They're a prayer board. Every figure out there is asking the same thing. Send water. Make it grow. Sit with that for a second, because it changes the whole picture. This isn't art for visitors in the sky. It's a whole society on its knees, begging the ground for rain. And here is where it turns dark, because a prayer that big doesn't come for free. They thought it had to be paid for. And what they paid with were heads. We have the heads, more than 100 of them. They did it carefully, which is the part that stays with you. The head was taken off with a knife of volcanic glass. The brain was drawn out. A hole was bored through the forehead, and a woven cord threaded through it, so the head could be carried or hung. The lips were sometimes pinned shut with cactus spines. And then, in that bone-dry air, the head simply dried and kept. Some of them still have skin, still have hair. For most of the last century, everyone assumed the obvious. Trophies of war, enemy heads, taken from some rival tribe in battle. It's the comfortable answer. The violence happens to outsiders, to them, not to us. Then someone actually tested it. In 2009, a team led by Kelly Knudsen ran the chemistry of the bone and teeth, the strontium and oxygen isotopes that record the water you drank and the food you ate as a child. If the heads came from foreign enemies, their chemistry would look foreign. It didn't. The trophy heads matched the local people, the ones buried with full honors in the same cemeteries. They weren't killing strangers for the rain. They were killing their own, their neighbors, maybe their own kin. I'm not going to dress that up. It's about the bleakest thing I know in archaeology. A community so desperate for water that it fed its own people to the ground, head first. Once you see the water, you can't unsee it. It's the whole civilization. Look at the lines. They run to water. Look at the heads. On Nazca pottery, severed heads are painted with plants sprouting straight out of them. The head as a seed, death traded for growth. Even the killing was about water. And then look at what they built underground, which is the part that should make you respect them. They were dying of thirst on the surface, so they went under it. They dug a network of aqueducts called puquios, stone channels reaching deep below the desert to tap the water table. On the surface, you see corkscrew funnels of stone spiraling down into the dark, and they aren't decoration. The Nazca shaped them so the desert wind would drop into the funnel and push the water along the tunnel. A pump with no moving parts and no power but the air. Here's how good it was. 43 of those puquios are still running today. 17 centuries later, farmers in Nazca still drink from them. So understand who we're talking about. Not primitives waiting for a god to land. Engineers. People who solved water in a place that had almost none. The lines, the heads, the tunnels. It's all one thing. It's a civilization that organized every part of itself, its art, its faith, its violence, around the hunt for water. That is the message in the desert. Not welcome travelers. Just please, please send rain. So why have you never heard that version? Why is it always spacemen? I'll be honest about it. Because the truth doesn't sell. Chariots of the Gods sold tens of millions of copies on the runway story. There are television channels that have run the alien version for years. Ancient farmers managed their groundwater and prayed for rain doesn't fill a stadium. Aliens landed in Peru does. And I don't think it's a conspiracy. Nobody's hiding the strontium study. It's published. It's public. Anyone can read it. I think it's something quieter and sadder than a cover-up. The archaeologists who know this write for each other. In journals nobody else opens. The people who can hold a crowd mostly haven't read them. So the loud story wins by default, and the loud story is the lie. But I think there's one more reason, and it's the real one. A landing strip is a flattering mystery. It says this place was special, chosen, visited. The truth is the opposite, and it's a mirror. It says a society can want something so badly, can fear so much, that it will carve up the earth and carve up its own people chasing it. We'd rather look up at a spaceship than down at that. Which brings me back to the last line. The one I told you isn't a drawing. Here's how the Nazca story actually ends. They needed farmland, so they cleared the desert's one defense, a tree called the huarango. It's an extraordinary thing, a tree that lives 1,000 years, that pulls moisture and nitrogen into dead ground, and holds the whole fragile valley together with the deepest roots of almost any tree alive. The huarango was the reason anyone could farm there at all. And to plant more corn and cotton, they cut it down, slowly, generation by generation, until it was gone. We know this because a Cambridge team led by David Beresford-Jones read it in the pollen and the soil. And we know what came next. With the forest gone, the land had nothing left to hold it. Around the year AD 500, a massive El Niño broke over the mountains. And the rain they'd begged for their whole history finally came. It came as a wall of water and mud, and it tore down the bare valley and washed the fields and the towns away. That's the last line. Not drawn, gouged into the desert by the flood, straight through a people who'd spent 800 years drawing prayers for water. They got their rain. It erased them. So here's the message, the real one, finally readable 1,500 years later. A civilization that organized everything around water destroyed the one thing that kept its water. It drew its prayers facing the sky while it cut down the world at its feet. And the only way to read the whole thing is from above, from a plane, on a planet that is cutting down its own huarango right now while you watch. That head in Chicago was a person. They cut it off to make it rain. And 15 centuries later, The rain is the thing that proves they were never being watched from the stars. They were just afraid and human and running out of time. That's where the real investigation starts. Not in the fantasy, in the archive. There's one more place this leads, and it's a few hundred miles up the same coast. Skulls, human skulls, stretched into long shapes that don't look human at all. And a whole industry online insisting they're not. But that's the next one.